offered, well, maybe not offered, I asked him, agreed to give. I want to say that somebody asked me yesterday at lunch whether this is a privilege that is reserved for Nizar or whether some others could have this privilege. So everybody could have this privilege. If any of you have something to impart to the rest of the group, we will welcome it and we will schedule it. And we're in fact not just welcome it, we encourage it. So please, I forgot who asked me that question. I suppose otherwise he'd be on the hook already. But so you can still escape, but all right, so please.
Thank you. So this is a tutorial that I've given before a few times, and every time I try to kind of style it more toward the audience, and we have a very special kind of audience here because a lot of you guys have been asking a lot of questions, you know, in the lab about specific things. So hopefully I'll be able to answer a lot of these questions, but if you have any questions, like stop and ask me in the middle of this. So this is, you know, if you make it as interactive as possible. So basically the goal here is not to talk about computational solutions or approaches to how to solve things, but more of, you know, the basic phenomena and concepts. And maybe, you know, I put a lot of references to what's been done, but I'm not going to be discussing specific work. It's just kind of, you know, here's the situation of this language that we're interested in.
That's just for today or all three?
It's going to be for all three of them. The three parts are actually, I'll describe what the three parts are going to be about in a second. So a big part of the distinction that I make actually here is on the usage of the word Arabic. So there's Arabic as in the Arabic script and Arabic as in the Arabic language. And these are very different things. And then even when we talk about Arabic language, we need to make a distinction between standard Arabic and the different dialects. And you'll see this distinction being made throughout the tutorial. So basically there's three parts that are going to be done here. Today we'll be doing basically part one, where we talk about the orthography. So this has to do more of the basics of the Arabic script. And it's not just, it's actually quite tied with everything else. All of these pieces are quite involved in each other. But you know, we're starting by the orthography, and then in the second part I'm going to be doing the morphology and start with the syntax, and then the third part, the third lecture, will basically finish up with syntax, talk about machine translation issues and dialects. And I'm hoping here for the machine translation that over the next couple of weeks, the more questions that come up, I'll actually integrate them. So I'm actually improving my tutorial given your feedback here. So I'm gonna like doing this. So good. All right, so orthography, we're going to start with talking about the Arabic script, what are its features, then specifically talk about phonology of standard Arabic and its relationship with the spelling, with the script. Then I just have a small section that was kind of cute. This was not actually in the workshop, the summer lecture that was done. I reduced a lot of these just to recognize Arabic versus Persian versus other things. There's basically these little skills that you can acquire, kind of similar to being able to look at some text in Roman script and tell that it's German, even though you don't really understand German, or tell that it's from a certain possible set of languages without knowing the language. So hopefully I'll introduce you to some of the tricks to be able to do that. And then we'll talk about encoding issues. And I actually thought about some of the questions that came up over the last couple of days about Buckwalter encoding, because all of us are using it. So I added a few slides, and I added kind of a slide about how to pronounce, to guess a vowel. So these might not look as, they're half-cooked to some level. So excuse me with that. But that's going to be at the end of the presentation. All right, so Arabic. Arabic is this part down here. Basically, historical notes. Arabic actually is from the same kind of big family that produced the Roman script. All of it comes from Phoenician. And you get these forms, and you're going to say, but these look quite different. Well, this is kind of the Arabic that was used about 1,500 years ago, just at the dawn of Islam. And you don't have any dots. It's basically the basic forms of the letters that were used. And nowadays, Arabic is a much more complex script that had a lot of things been added to it.
When you say it came from Phoenician,
yes.
Is it really? In other words, the A is in fact from the K, or?
The A. Oh, this one here?
Is it that through a development like that? Or
No, you have this A, the Phoenician aleph basically got turned around, about like 90 degrees, and that's how it became an A. But the K was backward in Phoenician compared to the Roman. So there are lots of changes that happened. But I mean, this is pretty much accepted within the field of basically this is the history of
yeah, but it's a kind of letter by letter?
versus
Versus that the whole thing got screwed up and became the Roman alphabet.
No, I'm sure there was a big effect of screwing up, but change, evolution. Like for example, Phoenician and also a lot of the lower set here did not write short vowels. And a lot of the languages that kind of went toward the Greek and the Roman needed to specify the vowels. So they took some of the letters and turned them into vowels. This kind of similar, like in Yiddish, this happened too, where like you have the ayin in Hebrew is taken, it's a consonant, and it's turned into a vowel in some cases. So this kind of language change orthography change or orthography adaptation does happen. There's also lots of stuff that people talk about, like with the direction of the letters, because had to do with the way people would actually write using like the kind of instruments, so there are lots of other pieces that are interacting here. But as a class, this is all seem to be closer to each other than, for example, Chinese kanji characters, right? Just a different class of different philosophy of doing things. During the next about 10 slides, I'll describe exactly what this means. So maybe this is just a statement of that Arabic is an alphabet versus a syllabary. For example, like the hiragana, katakana set, or kanji character set. It has allographic variants, which basically means it has different forms of the word, of the letter, depending on its position. It has diacritics that could be optional and basically appear over and under the words. And it has ligatures, which are basically cases where letters could appear on top of other letters or merge in different shapes. Okay, now Arabic script is also used for Arabic, the language, but also used for many other languages, Persian, Kurdish, Urdu, Pashto, many others. The relationship here, all of these like Persian, Kurdish, and Urdu and Pashto, they're actually from a totally different family. They're not Semitic, so this is Indo-European, this is Semitic. So it actually had a wide coverage in terms of the script of how it was used for different families. All right, so the alphabet, you can talk about it in terms of letter forms and letter marks. The letter forms, they should in principle look similar to that last thing we saw down there, the Arabic script from 1500 years ago. And these are the basic shapes that are allowable within the Arabic script. There's no more shapes that have been added. Now, the letter marks are sets of dots or squiggles. So this is a hamza, or this is a medda. It's like a tilde looking thing that could be added over or under the letters. And these are not like, they look like the Hebrew dots, if you're familiar with the Hebrew dots, but they're not, the Hebrew nikud. These are obligatory, that you have to write them, otherwise the letter you don't know what the letter is. Now the extended languages, this is just for standard Arabic. The extended languages add basically more combinations. And you can see kind of a similar logic to adding, the dots in the German for the umlauts and other things like this. So, and these were added they mean different things depending on the language that's using them. So a basic letter is constructed by combining a dot or a letter mark together with the letter form. So for example, these three here have the same basic shape for the letter form, but they have three different types of letter marks. And that's how you distinguish between B, B, T, and Th. So these are different phonemes, they're different graphemes, they're basically different letters. S and sh are distinguished also in a similar way. The representation I use here, if I put them between slashes, is going to be the International Phonetic Alphabet. And then, some of these are distinctive. However, there are cases where there's actually a single case. That's kind of a big headache in Arabic, is called a glottal stop or hamza. And this is a sound that you find in the middle of uh-oh, That's the sound that belongs here. But it has basically 7 different ways of writing it. So you have, in some cases, the script is non-distinctive in how, when it relates to the phonology, but most of the time it is. And we can talk some more about why this happens, There are very complex rules that they scare little children with, seriously. Okay. The other feature of Arabic is that it has all these, yes, hi.
Sorry, when you say it's a pain in the ass, you mean to learn how to write correctly, not to computationally process.
Yes, there were the rules for the specific form of the Hamza are quite complex, and there's a lot of exceptions to them. And so there's an algorithm that they teach, that they taught us growing up of how to figure out the right form. But there's always these exceptions. So this is there's actually a historical reason for that. What is that had to do with basically dialects that existed 1400 years ago, and trying to standardize the spelling then. They made decisions to try to basically accommodate multiple interpretations, whether, for example, this could be a glottal stop or a long A.
But my point is, there's ambiguity in the production, not in the analysis.
Yes, that's right. Yes, right. That's right. Of course, because yes, you won't have any ambiguity between this and any of the other characters, right? And so you get these different. Additionally, you have the different forms of the letters. So, for example, every letter would have 4 forms, depending whether it's standalone, if it's in the beginning, it's the middle, or at the end of the word.
Which form?
So, for example, here, this is the standalone. So if you take, this is the character, a letter, when it's by itself, if you just write it between 2 spaces, it looks like this. At the beginning of the word, it's written like this. In the middle, it's written like this, and at the end, it's written like this. And you can see the logic of the continuity. You're basically trying to construct a word by stringing all the letters together.
Distinguish between script and printed?
No, there is no distinction. In principle, there is none. There is no form that is a block letter form that's used.
We have a difference.
Right. No, there isn't. Actually, that's one of the differences. The other one is that there is no sense of capital versus small letter. So these are basically independent. It doesn't really care. And now, to add more complexity, there's some ambiguities in some cases between, the letter form could have, if you notice here, for example, the letter form for this and this are different. They might not look, within this font, but this is a bit wider than this one, and they actually are different basic letter forms. But in their medial positions, they could look exactly the same, right? And you also get some subset of the letters that are disconnective. So all of these letters connect from both sides. So you can have a letter before connecting and a letter after. There's a subset of the letter that only connect from one side. They don't connect next. So they're always basically breaking. And visually, that looks like as if you have a space following the letter. And you could actually, in some cases, with handwriting, if the space happens to be a bit over some threshold of what you're used to, you could actually read the word as if it's 2 separate words, because you have to try to make them close to each other. So we put these things together. For example, here is k, t, and b, 3 letters, and that's what they would look like. I colored them. So.
Right to left.
Of course, right to left is how Arabic is written. And the vowels we're not discussing yet. It's going to come next. And here's a case of a disconnective. The aleph is disconnective, so the letter that comes after it would have an initial or a standalone, depending on if there's something after it. So diacritics. So diacritics, 0-width characters, which mean basically they need something so that they can appear on top of. They're not going to stand alone by themselves. They're used for different things. The most common use is as a short vowel. So Arabic has 3 short vowels, a, u, and e, and you get these different forms basically. It's a slash in the case of the a that appears above, a little kind of squiggle in the case of the u, and a slash that goes under in the case of the b. So you can see the word there, katab, basically the word that we saw earlier would be spelled with these 2 little slashes on top of it to basically specify the vowels and how they appear. There's another set of the diacritics called nunation. So that's like another one of those good words to know in some cases, which basically It's a marker of indefiniteness. This was actually came out of a discussion earlier, like a couple of days ago. So it's the marker of indefiniteness in Arabic. It's pronounced as a vowel followed by a consonant n. So it's always n, un, or in. But it's written always as a diacritic. That is a double form of the short vowel. So a is basically doubling of the a, and the u is doubling of the u, and the e is doubling of the e. But you pronounce it as an, un, or in. Being a diacritic, that means it's optionally rewritten. So sometimes it's not written.
But it's always pronounced.
And it's.
If it's not written, is it still pronounced?
If it's not written, it's not, well, if you have somebody who's doing a good job reading, they have to pronounce it. But you can, being kind of, I mean, both of these basically in modern era, in spoken dialects basically disappeared. There is no case marking whatsoever, and there is no nunation. So all of them became zero. So people basically either choose not to pronounce them at all, and just kind of, you have enough information from the context to know whether the word is definite or indefinite. No. So there's other diacritics also. A case of, one is the no vowel marker. So this basically says there's no vowel here. So just basically if you're fully diacritizing and you want to make sure that the reader knows that there is an a here, there's an e here, and there's nothing here, that's the character that you use. And also you get a double consonant marker. This is a shedda. So this is a special case between the diacritics because all of the other ones that we saw, well, I suppose the nunation had some consonantal piece to it. But they really had to do with the vowels. And here you're actually talking about the consonant. This basically says that whatever consonant I'm on, double it, right? So you could basically, this word over there is kettab. You actually pronounce the T twice. You can see it over here. And they do combine with each other. So you could have, in principle, a double consonant at the end of a word that happens to be indefinite in a nominative case. And you get, ubbun.
Do words have spaces between them?
Words do have spaces between them when they're written,
so there's
yes.
A space because there are sometimes these letters
Right,
which have a space.
Right. But you also have, yes.
Every word is delineated by space.
Yes. And the spaces that are between the letters in terms of the internal encodings, they're not spaces. They're basically just part of the shape of the letter. So the letter just doesn't, so you can still say, a word is anything that's separated by space on either end. Okay, so you get these pieces together, putting the vowels, and you get similar words. Again, there's a lot of ambiguity that comes from deleting the vowels and also the letter marks. One last thing about ligatures. So there are cases where basically, so this is the word for salam, spelled S-L-A-M. And in principle, if you follow the rules of spelling, it's spelled this way. But that's not the case. It's spelled in a funny way. So the L that looks like a big U here in the middle ends up being spelled in an alternative way. L is problematic letter for spelling for lots of places. And this is one of them. But this is the only exception. This is the only ligature that is written, that's required.
What ligature means. I thought that's the little things.
That's a diacritic in that case.
So is this specific to salam?
No, this is specific to L followed by A.
Oh, I see.
So L followed by A
written.
is written this way if they appear in that order. Which creates, yeah, hi.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Which creates a certain problem because L followed by A is also the word for no, which creates certain ambiguity in some cases. If a word starts with an A and now you need to add an L to it at the beginning as a prefix, you end up having to spell it in a totally different way to avoid, a big semantic misinterpretation of not X versus, yeah.
Could you say again which diacritics are optional and which are obligatory?
They're all optional.
I'm sorry, I thought you said early on that some of them actually changed the letter.
No, so these are not diacritics. The ones that change the letter are
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry.
are letter marks. These are letter marks. They're not diacritics. So these have to be there. They are obligatory. The diacritics are the ones that are optional. I try to use different terminology for them. They're very different. Okay. All right, so another concept in Arabic script that's interesting is this concept of tatwil or elongation. That this is interesting because sometimes you'll actually see it in text. If you get raw text from the web or like, for example, the UN proceedings, there are lots of times where you get, dashes or these long character, you get a word that has a long form to it. And these elongation pieces are actually represented as separate characters in the text itself to force the word to be longer. So the history of this elongation is basically trying to do manual typesetting in certain cases, but also to give prominence to the words. So if you have a title that is short, or you want to basically, head, or put a heading or a subheading, and you want to make it more prominent, you basically add these extra characters in it that make the word look fuller. So it's totally a visual effect, and it's one of the first things when we do pre-processing of text that we just clean up, throw all of it out. So this is basically the same word, but with different types of elongation, different degrees of elongation.
Wait a minute, I understood you to say that we might elongate it in order for its appearance, but alternatively we might elongate it because we change the sound.
Oh, no. There is no effect on sound whatsoever.
No.
No.
It's not an elongation of some vowel.
No. There's not.
So
No.
It's just visual.
This is visual elongation. Maybe I should actually add the word visual elongation there just to make sure.
I see.
Yes. So this is only to give it prominence on the text. Remember, a lot of Arabic words, if you write them phonetically, they tend to be, they could be longer than they appear because you drop a lot of your short vowels. So you can have very important words or names that you want to appear on the page and have prominence, and you just basically can't have that. So this idea of basically extending the form is what comes. Another thing, a different degree of elongation happens automatically nowadays, like in your word processing. If you choose a justification mode to make like left-right justify so that the text looks like a full block, whereas like, for example, in Roman script, the justification happens by adding little spaces and spreading out between the words. In Arabic, it's considered less visually appealing, and instead you spread out the words. So there are lots of uses for this tatwil concept. You also get, this kind of answers the earlier question about the script versus, there are lots of fonts. Basically, there is no distinction of print versus script, but you get a lot of variations of the fonts. A lot of them, they have, so this is kind of more fancy at the top here, where you can see, for example, this one, it tries to basically have the letters in a sequential order, where you can actually almost, separate them. But here, like these two letters appear on top of each other in this font. So this is, the G kind of extends under, the M and the H, they appear on top of each other. So there's, I think, you can have up to 3 letters in a vertical combination in some cases. And this is just kind of a fancier fonts. This is closer to how you would write. And, print used to be more like this. Now, because of, typography and, electronic fonts, you can do this easily. Okay, so, and we said earlier that Arabic is written right to left. However, numbers are written left to right in principle. So you're not actually going to switch the order. Decimal numbers in Arabic and in Roman script are exactly the same. If you see a number, don't try to read it backwards. It's the same number. This actually, it's funny, but in the UN corpus at one point there was a big issue where some of the numbers were inverted, some were not, and it's not really clear what the history of the pre-processing that went in actually caused this issue. Arabic numerals, are not, in the Arab world, they're only used in the western side of the Arab world. So this is Tunisia and Algeria and Morocco. So it's the same Arabic numerals we're used to in the West. In the Middle East, you actually use a different set. And it's one-to-one correspondence. It's exactly, this is really this. There's no difference, and there's no effect on the way you write it.
And you still write it from left to right?
You still write it in left to right, yes. And you actually, for like the small numbers, Arabic happens to read them right to left. So you say 2 and 60. But for the big numbers, you actually also read them left to right. You start with 1,900, then 2 and 60. Okay. So now we stop talking about the script. We're gonna start talking about the phonology. But since we're really not interested, a lot of us are not interested in the phonology part. So it will always be linked back to the script and how things are written. But good to know. Arabic has 28 consonants, 3 short vowels and 3 long vowels, and the writing system is mostly phonemic. And I will let you know. I'll tell you all the exceptions that comes after that. In this diagram here, I listed all the phonemes that appear in Standard Arabic, and I listed the letters of the alphabet. And I did the alignment of what can map to what, all the possible options. And you can see that most of them, they have one-to-one mapping. So, ba is spelled in one way only, sa is spelled in one way only. But you get on these ends here and over there, you get some ambiguity. And these are the exceptions that I'll be talking about.
You're leaving out here the initial video title and citation forms.
For the letters, you mean?
Yeah, I mean each of the things on the bottom is really going to correspond to at least 4 forms.
Yes. Yeah, this is basically assuming a grapheme level, which is basically just like the letter citation form. Right. Yes, you're right. The letter form is not going to change. If it's initial, medial, or final, it's going to have exactly the same value. All right, so it's mostly phonemic, except we saw this earlier, this idea that the short vowels can appear as diacritics. Now,